Good evening. We continue our trek through Acts, and as we notice now, we've been following the Apostle Paul. Now remember, the beginning of the book of Acts was Jesus in his 40 days with the disciples after his resurrection. He was crucified, he was resurrected within 3 days. He's crucified Friday, resurrected sometime early Sunday morning. And we say 3 days because by the Jewish calendar, any part of a day counted as a day. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then he was with the disciples for 40 days, teaching them and being with them. And then there were 10 days in between. And then we have Pentecost, which is Acts chapter 2. In Acts chapter 1, if you recall, Jesus told the disciples, don't do anything. Stay in Jerusalem. Don't you dare leave until you receive the Holy Spirit. I always find that funny. Jesus was pretty much saying, stay. Don't mess this up. Jesus was telling the disciples, you will mess this up without the Holy Spirit. So in Acts chapter 2, the Holy Spirit comes upon them. Wow, boom, it's amazing. Like a mighty rushing wind, tongues like tongues of fire, people speaking in tongues they never learned, awesome miracles, thousands saved. I think it was 5,000 in that instance. And all these people are baptized. That's Acts chapter 2. Then we kind of follow Peter and John in the first few chapters of Acts. And then in Acts chapter 9, Paul was saved, and then it starts to transition. But Acts chapter 10 was back to Peter. And then Acts chapter 11 is Peter. And Acts chapter 12 is Peter being released from prison. And then Acts chapter 13 is the first missionary journey of Paul and Barnabas. And Paul pretty much just takes it away from there. You have the Jerusalem Council in Acts chapter 15. First major council of the church. It's like a business meeting. There's nothing wrong with business meetings. But I prefer to call them ministry meetings or ministry update meetings. And after that, Acts chapter 15, the very end, Paul continues with his second missionary journey, but not with Barnabas that time. With Silas, if I recall. So, we continue the Acts of the early apostles, the Acts of the early church, the Acts of the Holy Spirit. And notice, it truly is the Acts of the Holy Spirit. It's God who grew the church. It's God who's working in the church. It's really not the apostles. The apostles were hiding in a room in Jerusalem until the Holy Spirit came upon them. The apostles fled when Jesus was crucified. They were denying him. But once the Holy Spirit came, everything changed. And the Holy Spirit is emboldening Paul as he goes before these trials. And so he was 2 years here in a prison. At the end of Acts chapter 24, it said 2 years had passed. Then Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and wishing to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. So he stayed in prison, and we come to chapter 25. Festus, then having arrived in the province, 3 days later went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. Festus goes up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the chief priests and the leading men of the Jews brought charges against Paul, and they were urging him, requesting a concession against Paul that he might have him brought to Jerusalem at the same time, setting an ambush to kill him on the way. It's been 2 years, and they still want to ambush and kill Paul. This is truly premeditated murder. Or an assassination, we could call it, right? As a martyr. So they're still trying to do that, ambush him. Verse 4. Festus then answered that Paul was being kept in custody at Caesarea. Paul's not in Rome yet. We will see that in a couple chapters. He's not in Jerusalem. He's in Caesarea. And that he himself was about to leave shortly. Therefore, he said, let the influential men among you go there with me, and if there's anything wrong about the man, let them prosecute him. This is due process. Going through a court hearing to prosecute him. Verse 6. After he had spent not more than 8 or 10 days among them in Jerusalem, he went down to Caesarea. Notice how it says down because Jerusalem is higher in elevation. And the next day, he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. So here comes one of the first trials. Verse 7. After Paul arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him, which they could not prove. There are many charges. There are serious charges. They cannot prove these charges. Verse 8. Well, Paul said in his own defense, I have committed no offense either against the law of the Jews or against the temple or against Caesar. Paul saying, I have not committed an offense against the law of the Jewish people, against the temple, or against even Caesar. No charge. He has not committed a crime against Jews or Romans. No crime at all, he's saying. Not even a speeding ticket, if they had it back then. So no offense, he says, okay? Verse 9. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor. Notice that he still wants to do the Jews a favor. He still wants to keep peace in that area. So he's wishing to do the Jews a favor. Answered Paul and said, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me on these charges? But Paul said, I'm standing before Caesar's tribunal where I ought to be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews, as you also very well know. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything worthy of death, I do not refuse to die. But if none of those things is true of which these men accuse me, no one can hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar. Notice this. Paul is a Roman citizen, and he's appealing to Caesar. And that's what gets him to Rome, and that's what gets him with the gospel to Rome. He wants to take the good news of Jesus Christ to Rome. Verse 12. Then when Festus had conferred with his council, he answered, you have appealed to Caesar? To Caesar you shall go. Now when several days had elapsed, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea and paid their respects to Festus. While they were spending many days there, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there is a man who was left as a prisoner by Felix. And when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews brought charges against him, asking for a sentence of condemnation against him. Verse 16, I answered them that it is not the custom of the Romans to hand over any man before the accused meets his accusers face to face as an opportunity to make his defense against the charges. So after they had assembled here, I did not delay, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought before me. So again, he's just reviewing the case. He's reviewing the case to the local king here, okay? So where was I at? Okay, so verse 17. So after they assembled here, I did not delay, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal. We already said that. So verse 18. When the accusers stood up, they began bringing charges against him, not of such crimes as I was expecting. The charges are not what he expected. But they simply had some points of disagreement with him about their own religion and about a dead man, Jesus, whom Paul asserted to be alive. He's recognizing their charges were pretty much just about their own religion and about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's what it all boils down to. Being at a loss how to investigate such matters, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and there stand trial on these matters. But when Paul appealed to be held in custody for the emperor's decision, I ordered him to be kept in custody until I send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I also would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you shall hear him. Now, this is Agrippa, who's related to Herod, who we heard about in the Gospels. So now Paul before Agrippa, verse 23. So on the next day, when Agrippa came together with Bernice amid great pomp and entered the auditorium, accompanied by the commanders and the prominent men of the city, at the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Verse 24. Festus said, King Agrippa, and all you gentlemen here present with us, you see this man about whom all the people of the Jews appealed to me, both at Jerusalem and here, loudly declaring that he ought not to live any longer. But I found that he had committed nothing worthy of death. And since he himself appealed to the emperor, I decided to send him to the emperor. That would be Caesar. Verse 26. Yet I have nothing definite about him to write to my Lord. Therefore I have brought him before you all, and especially before you, King Agrippa. So after the investigation has taken place, I may have something to write. For it seems absurd to me, in sending a prisoner, not to indicate also the charges against him. We're going to stop there. Starting in chapter 26, we will have Paul's defense before Agrippa, the Herod Agrippa. And, you'll see in verse 1 of chapter 26, Agrippa said to Paul, you're permitted to speak for yourself. Then Paul stretched out his hand and proceeded to make his defense. And he's going to give his testimony once again. But we'll stop there for tonight, and we will return either Sunday night or Monday, at least probably. Remember, if you're in the Bethel Friends Church area, block party tomorrow night. Hope you all can come out 6:30 p.m. to 8:45. Weather's going to be great. Lots of free hot dogs, games for children and youth. And then at 9 p.m., we're going to have an outdoor movie. And if you can't make it, keep it in prayer. This is something to an opportunity to share love to our neighbors, of course, of Bethel Friends, and to our area, and to minister. So tomorrow night, keep that in mind. Block party 9 p.m. and hope this ministered to you as we continue to walk through the Acts of the Apostles, the Acts of the Holy Spirit, the Acts of the early church, and the key person is the Holy Spirit. Have a great night. God bless.